This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and here on the Skype on the phone today is Rick Lovard, Program Director at the Science and Entertainment Exchange. Rick, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I guess first question, pretty obvious one. What's the Science and Entertainment Exchange?
All right, so the exchange is basically 844-NEED-SCI, which is our actual phone number. It's a Hollywood hotline. If you dialed 844-NEED-SCI, then I or someone on staff here at the Science and Entertainment Exchange can answer any question that you have regarding science or engineering as it connects to or as it relates to a film, TV show, or video game.
So you are a hotline in Hollywood. 844 is like an 800 number, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
The intention is that filmmakers, people working in TV, just people working in entertainment, when they have science questions, they dial 1-844-NEED-SCI, and they can be connected with you. And then you, are you a scientist, or you connect them to scientists?
I connect them to scientists. So it's my job to know a lot of people in the entertainment industry, writers, producers, directors, actors, studio executives, and a lot of scientists and engineers out there. And so I'm the bridge between the two groups. So my background, actually, I have a film degree, so I have no scientific expertise whatsoever.
So how did you get caught up in this?
I've been working on TV shows. First, when I came out to LA, I worked at Creative Artist Agency, which is like the biggest sort of talent agency in Hollywood. And then I worked for 6 years on TV shows with a showrunner named Jason Katims, who later won an Emmy for Parenthood. But I worked with him on Friday Night Lights and Boston Public.
These are good shows. These are good TV. People love those shows. They're great shows. I love those shows.
Thanks. It's I learned a lot. Incredible people. It's wonderful experiences. There was a Peabody Award involved. It was awesome. But at a certain point, I was looking to do something a little bit different, and this opportunity came up. And I actually got a call from a buddy of mine from CAA who was basically let me know that the National Academy of Sciences was starting this program. And knew I was really into sci-fi and nerdy and into research, and asked me if I wanted to apply, and the rest is history.
One more quick question before I move on. What did you do for those shows? What was your actual role with those shows?
Yeah, so basically I was the writer's assistant on those shows, which basically means I was the guy in the room capturing nuggets of gold as they came out of the writing staff. So that's basically it's like an apprenticeship for being a writer on the shows.
The Friday Night Lights writer room, I'm more familiar with Friday Night Lights than Boston Public. That must have been an amazing writing room. Are there any stories from there? I'm a fan of the show. Is there anything you could tell us from there? Any inside Friday Night Lights baseball? I don't know if that quite works, but
I'd have to think about that one. We had it was a ridiculously talented staff of people. We had I'm trying to think. It's shot in Austin, Texas, so we had each of the cast members come out and for their own individual visits with the staff. The writer staff of the show, and that was pretty interesting because you'd be working in this room, and it almost felt like it was being broadcast by mail to us what was going on the set back in Austin. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a really good. Man, you kind of hit me with.
Sorry, I got you all wound up to talk about science, and then I went right back to Texas football.
Well, yeah, I think the biggest things that I remember from Friday Night Lights was that from working on that show was that the writer's strike happened right in the center of the show, and you kind of get to know the people around you on a whole different level when you're walking a line with the union, which is something you don't really think about when you're in Hollywood. Is sort of the whole that it's a union town. I guess you do somewhat with the various people on set, but when you're working towards being a writer on a show, you don't necessarily picture yourself walking a union line at any point in your career. But I don't know. Overall, it was just an incredibly interesting experience. Lots of great people. Fascinating. Interaction. Actually, even there was a fair amount of research that went into Jason Street's character. You may recall that in the pilot episode of that show, so I don't think it's a spoiler to throw it out there, that he gets paralyzed.
Sure, that's like the premise of the show almost.
Yeah, and Bridget Carpenter, who's since gone on to several other shows and sort of have her own great career, went very, very deep on medical research and visited a number of hospitals and actually learned as much about paraplegics as she possibly could, and sort of that and a few other examples of working with Jason Katims were sort of my first forays into being deep in the research when it came to developing a story. And so that's kind of was the first hint that I would like this job.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because if you ask me, like, what are some things that I think scientists might have helped out on, Friday Night Lights pretty far down the list. You think of things like, I don't know, Interstellar or like Gravity or something in space. But like, Friday, it's interesting to see how kind of everyone needs it. But so this is a fairly new thing. If you got a call when it was starting, how long has the Arts Exchange been around?
It's been around since November of 2008. We launched.
So that's pretty new.
It's pretty new, but in that time we've done over 1,600 consults on feature films and TV shows and video games.
And this was started by the National Academy of Sciences. I got to admit, I don't actually know what the National Academy of Sciences is like. What is their goal? What are they about, really? Why'd they start this thing?
Well, the National Academy of Sciences is the most prestigious honorific science institution in the United States. Our executive charter was signed by Abraham Lincoln, and we exist outside of the United States government. Our job is to be an independent, nonpartisan voice of what is most current and most accurate in science to the best of human knowledge. Every single working day of the year, the National Research Council, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences, puts out a committee report that is as dense as what you might write for a PhD dissertation. So we're basically putting out a dissertation every single working day of the year on topics that range from forensic sciences all the way to the dietary needs of farm animals. It can really range the gamut on anything. So about 8 years ago, higher ups, people way above my pay grade at the National Academy of Sciences, were looking at the landscape of science communication in the United States and thinking, what are some out-of-the-box things that we can do to communicate more broadly to the public? We have access to the best scientists in the world, but we don't engage the public directly in a really meaningful way. And so the thinking was, how can we connect with some of the best communicators in the country, i.e. Hollywood? And so this program was born, and a couple of other programs also exist over at the National Academies, but this program was born essentially to put a little bit of veg into the dessert. Like, we're aimed at narrative filmmakers, so we're not trying to. We do some work in the documentary world, but the thrust of what we do is trying to educate, whoever it may be, the writers on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so that the next time they talk about DNA on the show, that there is an element of truth or accuracy to what they're saying, so that if some kid in the audience happens to look up how DNA copies itself and finds that what the characters were discussing on the show is accurate, it might get that kid excited for a STEM career or more interested in learning about DNA. And in either case, that's a win. So that's sort of the thinking behind the program.
Now, I think there's sort of a perception that like Hollywood movies and TV shows, they're just not generally known for being scientifically accurate. Like there's sort of some skepticism, I think, that they're accurate. But it seems like the point isn't to make them completely accurate. Is that right? It's just to get nuggets of science in there, not to like make the thing, wall to wall completely scientifically accurate. Is that correct?
100%. I mean, we have wall-to-wall scientifically accurate films, and they're called documentaries. For us, we understand that the storyteller's first job is to tell a good story. For us, it's more about once you're in that theater and you have somebody who's got the audience's attention, if you can get just that one little teachable moment in there or that one tiny message, you can inspire a whole career. And I mean, all you have to do to sort of look for evidence of this is think about the number of scientists who say Spock was a character that influenced them, or Star Trek more broadly was a show that influenced them to want to get into their field. All
right, so the National Academy of Sciences is getting their precious science out there and everyone's learning, but what does Hollywood get out of it?
Well, for Hollywood, it's actually it's a really easy sell. I spend a lot of my time going into rooms in Hollywood and basically saying, I can help you research your project for free. It's a completely free service. We make it as easy as possible.
It's a pretty good pitch.
Yeah, you're right. It's pretty easy. I mean, in Hollywood, ideas are currency, so it's very easy to go into a room and say, if you're interested in learning about what's cutting edge in science, it might give you some story ideas, and that's really all you need, especially with the writers.
Right. So how often is that hotline ringing, and what does a typical request look like? Is it like Steven Spielberg on the phone, like dinosaur DNA? I just don't know. What's going on with that? Can you get someone who knows?
Well, it could be. I mean, Spielberg in particular has his own. Spielberg and Cameron are sort of two of the guys who have their own contacts in the science world and tend to go that way. But
they've been doing it forever. Probably, like they were probably into talking with science. I have to assume it's weird. Like I know Jurassic Park isn't a documentary, but it feels like there's some science in there. It feels like there's some meat in there, and I have to assume Spielberg was doing this before you guys existed. Was one of the people who's maybe in front of this, and James Cameron, of course, too, is all about the underwater exploration and that kind of thing.
Well, and Spielberg, honestly, de-extinction is a real thing. That's something that we're working on. That not we, it's in the Science and Entertainment Exchange, but scientists are actually looking at taking viable DNA from woolly mammoths or other creatures that lived not so long ago that the DNA has atrophied, and bringing them back. So I think Jurassic Park is rooted in some actual real world science that you can point to. And I mean,
wasn't Michael Crichton a scientist, or maybe he was a lawyer or something? But I think he had an interesting job before he was a writer.
He went to medical school.
That's it.
And I only know that because I read his book Travels, which was pretty fun. But I think the thing is that to get back to your question of what a consult looks like, it basically is we get maybe 2 or 3 on average a day, something along those lines, and we essentially it's somebody with a question on a TV show or a film calling up. It could be absolutely anything. It could be I have a scene where there's a box that's ticking in the harbor, and I want to learn about ordnance. I want to learn about the chemistry of different devices. Or it could be, I want to learn about synthetic biology because I'm interested, I'm writing, the next installment of the film Gattaca. Or it could be, I have a superhero who shoots some specific kind of goo, and I want to understand what that goo's made of and what it could be capable of. Or it could be, I want to learn about astrophysics or planetary biology or, honestly, the sky is the limit for us if it involves science, medicine, or engineering. The National Academy of Sciences is comprised of the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Medicine and another body called the National Academy of Sciences within the National Academy of Sciences. So we basically touch all things science, engineering, and medicine.
I have to assume that there's like some confidentiality when these people come to you, and you can't discuss specific things. But are there any projects that you guys have done, even in the past, like you felt like were particularly big wins that are a good example of what you can add to a film that you are able to discuss?
Yeah, the big example that we have was on the film Thor, and there's this full on through line throughout. That what I really like about this story, if you don't mind my telling it for a moment.
That was the question, actually. So yeah, please. Okay,
good. Is that this one actually reached out and had a direct impact on an end user? So basically, if you look at the original comics for Thor, the character played by Natalie Portman in the films is a nurse. And we did a consultation in which basically Marvel was trying to figure out how they could eventually make the Avengers, but at this point they had only had the Iron Man movie come out, and they were very smart in thinking that they had this very grounded character in Tony Stark that is fair. It's pretty plausible that somebody could build an exoskeleton. It might not be able to have all the capabilities of Tony Stark's, but it's all grounded in stuff that seems like it could be real, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But Thor is the Norse god of thunder. So how do you have an engineer who's fairly grounded standing next to the Norse god of thunder and have it ever feel plausible? And so they basically decided that, I think it's an Arthur C. Clarke quote, any science significantly advanced is indistinguishable from magic, and that Thor had advanced technology that made him seem like he was sort of on this other level or had superpowers, when in fact it was the technology of his people that was supporting him. And so essentially, they wanted to know how to ground all these different things you see in the comic books in something real. And one of the things that they brought us up in for, we did a full day consultation with them. But one of the things that they brought us in for was they wanted to learn about the Bifrost Bridge, which in Norse mythology connects Valhalla to Earth. And so what our theoretical physicist said was, well, maybe that could be an Einstein-Rosen bridge. An Einstein-Rosen bridge is essentially...
Thank you for understanding the assumed question there of what is an Einstein-Rosen bridge.
It's essentially a wormhole. So what you saw in like Interstellar,
sure,
it's basically the same phenomena. And so they were interested in that, and then they said, well, we have this issue that we've got this nurse character, and she's supposed to be there when Thor drops out of the sky, but we don't want it to be sort of in the middle of a city where 1 million people might have seen it. We want it to be somewhere very remote. And so what possible reason other than dumb luck would a nurse have for being out there? And our consultant, who is Sean M. Carroll at Caltech, said, yeah, that may be true for a nurse, but if she were a theoretical physicist and there were some data in the background radiation of the universe that she was seeing to indicate that an Einstein-Rosen bridge might be opening up in a specific spot at a specific time, then she'd have every reason in the world to be out in the middle of nowhere looking for the thing to happen.
How many of the theoretical physicist suggestions are that another character should be a theoretical physicist in the movie?
Well, I'll posit to you, not often enough, because I would argue that theoretical physicists are an underrepresented group in mainstream media.
I mean, I guess I guess I can't name any besides Natalie Portman's character in Thor. Now that you're mentioning it,
yeah. I mean, so that's one where organically, sort of in a way that made sense to the storyline, a scientist was able to say something at a critical moment that put a theoretical physicist on the screen that we might not have seen otherwise. And what was really amazing about this interaction was that when Thor 2 came out, Disney called us up and said, hey, we've got this theoretical physicist character. We want to do something with her. Do you have any ideas? And we brainstormed with them and created the ultimate mentorship adventure in which girls from all around the country became women of science and contacted women in STEM fields and then reported back to us on their interaction. And 10 of those girls who did that were flown to Los Angeles and got to walk the red carpet at the Thor 2 premiere and got to interact with other scientists. We set up a whole line of programming for them. So that's a way that you can sort of reach out of the screen when you've been there at a critical moment in time.
You're like the Einstein-Rosen bridge between Hollywood and these scientists.
I think that you could describe the Science and Entertainment Exchange as the Einstein-Rosen bridge of Hollywood and science. I like that a lot.
So I understand that when I can wrap my head around how when Marvel calls, you're like, oh, this is, I mean, even before the Avengers, you're like, oh, this is Marvel, these are a big deal, and how you might figure out who you should be working with in Hollywood. I think I understand that. I think most people understand that. But when it comes to scientists, when Marvel's like, yeah, we need a theoretical physicist, how do you select a theoretical physicist amongst all the theoretical physicists you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the National Academy of Sciences has something like 8,000 or 9,000 scientists that they can reach who have served on National Research Council committees. We have a couple of volunteers basically putting their hands up every single day from the science and engineering community saying, hey, I work at Rensselaer or Carnegie Mellon or Caltech, and I'm interested in working with the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And what we do is when that happens or when we're reaching out to new people, we actually call them up, schedule a time to actually get on the phone, get a sense of who they are, get a sense of what they do, get a sense of trying to pick the best communicators. We're not a program that trains great communicators, although we may be in the future. But we're a program that tries to identify the very best people. And so we have about 2,300 scientists and engineers who, over the last 7 years, that I or someone else on staff here at the Science and Entertainment Exchange has actually had a conversation with. And, honestly, a lot of it is, someone calls in, says they want to talk to a theoretical physicist. We connect them. We call the writer after the fact, and we call the scientist after the fact, and we say, hey, how'd that go? And over time, we get a certain people who kind of, it's clear, are the all-stars, there are the one thing that I would love to, if I could dispel a rumor right now, or a falsehood, I should say, right now, it's that there aren't a lot of great science communicators. Our problem is that we have, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to pick from. It's not that, gosh, how am I going to find a theoretical physicist who can? And I think a lot of people have an image of scientists as sort of, people who aren't. I'll just put it this way: just aren't the most social bunch. But that's just absolutely untrue. And it's amazing to find this embarrassment of riches in the science community.
Is there a type of scientist who is constantly in demand? Are you calling up that theoretical physicist every day? Is there one that you guys just find most people are looking for, or is it a pretty even spread? I'd say that there are when you get a major news story, like when they found water on the moon. We got a ton of people calling in asking about the moon all of a sudden. There's sort of a baseline coding, cybersecurity, genetics, astrophysics, and spaceships. Those are also a fair amount of forensic science that we get questions on. And then everything, I mean, probably there's an equal tranche of our call base that's also just completely random, out of the blue, crazy questions about, just
you would never even imagine it. Someone's come up with a really wacky scenario, and they want to know, how quickly someone would bleed out if they got injured in some crazy, grievous way, and then you're on the phone with a bunch of emergency room doctors asking them if they've ever seen any injury like that, kind of thing.
Was there ever one that was the request was so unusual it took you a minute to figure out what kind of scientist you even needed to be talking to?
That's a good question. Amy, I'm sorry, my colleague Amy's here too.
Please.
I'm going to ask her.
I'd love Amy's insight.
All right, Amy, has there ever been someone, or what comes to mind, top of mind, where the question was so out there that you weren't even sure what kind of scientist you needed to answer the question? I mean, I'll tell you one thing. A lot of times people will say, like, I have a time travel movie with a mutant who is traveling through time who just, got injured in a fight. I need a scientist to answer.
Give me your mutant time travel side. Well, like, what's time travel? Theoretical physics, I guess? Like, what's a time? Who does a time travel question go to?
Yeah, theoretical physicist. I mean, time travel is very possible. We're all doing it all the time, just very slowly and forwards. So the question is, what is possible based on what theoretical physics we actually know today? And the answer is, going forwards in time is just a matter of speed and gravity. Going backwards in time seems more of a challenge.
And then I guess the other side of that coin, is there like a type of scientist who you wish you had an excuse to call more often? Maybe like a bioethicist who's, really cracking, but there's just not that much demand for him from Hollywood at the moment?
Oh, I by the way, I mean, sorry, I don't mean to jump on your case in point there, but bioethicists, we call them all the time. There are all sorts of interesting questions that they have over, because I'd say, and I'll get back to your question, but I'd say that a lot of the questions that we get can be summed up in sort of what's 5 years or 5 to 20 years, we'll say, in the future, and that's across disciplines. And bioethicists are great to answer a lot of those questions. Because they have to be sort of generalists, and there's some philosophy and there's some, obviously, ethics in what they do.
What do bioethicists do when you're not calling them? I got to say, I don't actually know what a bioethicist might do.
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of them that I know anyway teach, or they work on things like advising medical procedures, like practices, like across whole vast regions of medical fields. Like, how does a hospital handle a crisis situation might be something you'd want a bioethicist in on that board that decides the procedure. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are a lot of bioethicists who serve on National Research Council committee reports, but most of the ones that I know, like the Berman Institute of Bioethics at Johns Hopkins University, they're teaching and they're writing and they're doing that.
That makes sense. So wait, I got to go back to it though. Who are we not calling enough of? Who is not in demand?
Oh man, who is not in demand? Who's just a amazing scientist? This is a good question for us. One thing, we don't get a lot of calls. I know I used it as a case in point earlier, but we actually don't get that many calls for materials scientists.
Oh, that's surprising, because I see a lot of things being smashed in movies. You might want more accurate smashing.
Yeah, I think when we got a call, this is a little bit different, but we did some consults on Frozen. Mm-hmm. On basically, we brought in like hydrologists to talk about how different kinds of snow moves, basically. But we don't get a lot of calls like that. We also had we had a physicist come in and do a presentation for Disney Animation a few years ago, and he basically walked them through like the subatomic universe and how different materials behave differently on a when you get down to the nanoscale where gravity is now an insignificant force. Like basically the name of the game, the big force in town is electromagnetism. And he was showing all sorts of wacky simulations of how things move in different ways that were blowing away the Disney animators. But that's not a call. Like we might get calls about how like nanobots work or nanotechnology, like what the promise of nanotech is, but we don't get a lot of calls in terms of like how it looks, and that's actually pretty mind blowing because I have an office at California Nanosystems Institute at UCLA, and they have they have one of the largest electron microscopes on the West Coast out here, and to look at the visualizations of different particles on the nanoscale is they're beautiful. It's pretty amazing.
Well, how much of your consulting is about the writing and about the genesis of the idea, and then because what we're talking about, or what I'm imagining when you talk about material sciences, is more of like special effects and how, not necessarily part of the plot, just like, I don't know, how does this wall look when Optimus Prime smashes through it? And I have to assume like most visual effects houses have like in-house physicists. Like I have to assume Pixar and Disney, they've got like physics experts like working at Pixar who are, always thinking about like hair underwater and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and they bring in consultants, and they do a lot with biomechanics as well. That's true. I mean, from our point of view, in terms of the mission of the program, the best place for us to be is when a big Hollywood writer just had that awesome idea that they're about to go write, or just got the assignment from the studio. We want them to come and call us and go have a beer with a scientist, and start basing their idea in the science from the get-go. Because you can lay track at the beginning of your development process that just sets the whole concept on a sort of better, more accurate plane than if like you call us up 2 weeks before you go into production and you're like, hey, I need some jargon for this one scene, and the scene is scientifically completely implausible. Like, it's a much better place for us to get at the beginning. And it is true, we do a lot more consults at early and midstream phases of story development than we do for art departments, but we do some consults for visual effects and art departments as well. It's just more common that it's the writer calling us.
You are probably the most qualified person to answer this question, this pretty specific question, but Hollywood people and scientists seem like two very different groups. What do they have in common?
By the way, I really appreciate your saying that, because I mostly spend my time feeling wholly unqualified for anything. So thank you for that.
Well, you're in the middle of both of them. It's very unique.
I'm hanging out with these very eminently qualified human beings all the time, and but you
can swim in both those waters, which is a pretty unusual skill,
Yeah, it is. When I'm in a room with scientists, I'm the Hollywood guy, and when I'm in a room of Hollywood people, I'm the science guy. So it's a funny. You're right. It's funny. It's a funny spot. But so what they have in common, actually, I think, is if you zoom out quite a bit and you look at their process, their creative process, because there is a lot of creativity in making science. They basically have the same overarching structure to their careers, which is that, you have an idea, there's a very specific framework and structure by which that idea through which that idea must be executed. And you sort of have markers along the way that you have to hit in either your story or your experiment that tell you if you're structurally moving in the right fashion.
What are those? I know what that looks like in a science. You test something, the numbers are good. What does that look like in art? Like, what are those milestones where you're moving in the right direction?
Well, you'd look at the act structure. I mean, you could look at the act structure in the physical story. So you could have the inciting incident and the call to action and the setbacks that happen in the second act and the all is lost moment and the resolution of your story. But you could also look at it taking the story elements out and look at it as the development process itself. From the initial sale of a pitch or a script through the development into pre-production and through production. In each case, at some point you got to publish, and once it gets out into the world, very quickly whether or not your idea, your baby, was a success or not.
Is there an example of a movie that you guys have worked with that has some pretty decent science in it that people would be surprised to hear has decent science in it? And I'll tell you one I thought of. It's older than you guys, so I don't think you worked on it. But the one I always think of here is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, one of my favorite movies, which is like, at first glance, it's like a goofy kind of stoner movie. But as I've watched it over the years, and also the sequel, Bogus Journey, I've come to appreciate that, there's someone sat down and really thought about all the time travel, and in the second one, metaphysics and that kind of thing. Are there any examples like that of movies you guys have worked with that people would be surprised to hear that someone took the care to call a scientist?
That's interesting. I keep mentioning Marvel projects, and I would say that there are any number of them. The folks at Marvel across the board, both in the cinematic universe and in television, really are interested in engaging with scientists and getting the science right. And it's an area where, at first blush, you wouldn't think they would have to. So that's one thing. I don't know. I have to think about. I mean, we've done a lot of consultation work with The Good Wife.
Oh, okay. So what about The Good Wife? I mean, I guess there's cases, right? She's a lawyer, so presumably there's some forensic stuff there and science stuff to be dealt with there, right?
Yep. And they've asked us any number of questions over the years about, as you said, forensics and medical science and how. Let's see. I think it's always hard for me because I'm never sure. I'm not sure which ones made it to screen on that particular show. Frozen, actually,
Frozen's a good one.
And Big Hero 6 is another one we did a lot of work on.
Oh, because in Big Hero 6, he is, actually did an earlier episode of this podcast with someone who developed soft robots. And we actually talked quite a lot, as you might imagine, about Baymax, who is probably the world's most famous soft robot.
I think Big Hero 6 is one. I think there are a couple of movies that came. We didn't work on Gravity, but Big Hero 6 and Gravity, I think, are two movies that could really be films that inspire kids into STEM careers. That really had a lot of. I mean, take or leave. There, I know there's sort of this stuff is all over the internet where Gravity had some issues with physics, but I think what they got right was very much the emotional journey of the character and the claustrophobic yet sort of totally out of control feeling that character goes through in trying to get back to Earth. And to me, that it made space seem like an adventure, and that's Hollywood's job.
Well, that's actually you're bringing up a great point now, which is you take a movie like Gravity, where obviously there's a lot of scientific care put into it, or any of the movies that I think you might think of when you think of, like, quote unquote best science movies. So like Gattaca or Interstellar, like movies that obviously someone put a lot of was very concerned about the science of. Clearly, obviously, you can go through those movies and find scientific inaccuracies, like here or there. Like her hair floats here and it shouldn't be floating there. And, like, that doesn't ruin the movie. I don't think it ruins the science. But it does bring up an interesting question of, like, how do you know where to draw the line? Like, at what point do you stop worrying about scientific inaccuracy?
I mean, personally, when you're thinking about the character's hair, you're over the line.
I got it. Big Lebowski, I'm with you.
Thank you. I think that honestly, even if you take a movie like one movie that we worked on that wasn't terrifically. I mean, that didn't have the most accurate science, but that I think in the end got people thinking about science in the way that we would like to think about science is San Andreas. You look at that movie, and the impact of the earthquake is. It's just there's a lot of stuff. You could, if you wanted to sit there and pick apart, the science of seismology and how it's portrayed, and yet the Paul Giamatti character is heroic. He saves millions of people by essentially hacking into, he takes extraordinary measures to find a way to save people and to get good information out. He's, and the fact that the scientist is a hero in that film is I think, wonderful. But
I haven't
also,
seen the movie. Is The Rock the scientist in that movie, or is it Paul Giamatti?
Paul Giamatti. The Rock plays an emergency responder.
It'd be great if The Rock and Paul Giamatti were like colleagues in the lab.
I love that. I love that. That's for the sequel.
Yeah.
But I think that the thing about that film is that even though a lot of the science was exaggerated and there were problems with it, it got people talking about earthquakes here. I live in Southern California, and it got people talking about the need for a go kit. And anytime that you can have an open public dialogue about the real science, I think it's a win. So, to get back to your question on that, for me, the line is if it's completely baseless and it perpetuates something untrue. If it's giving you if it's based in something that's real and it's getting the public to have a dialogue about true science in some area, whatever it is, then it's good. It's good for us all to be. At the end of the day, what a lot of what the National Academies does is try to educate the public on what we know, and those committee reports that we're writing are designed to inform policy, so that we can, regardless of what part of the political spectrum you're on, you can have the best informed opinion possible coming into a voting booth or the floor of Congress. And so that's if we can help educate the public in whatever way, just through a discourse that comes out of a movie that is hyperbole, but is exciting and gets people thinking, then that's a win for us.
What are some of your favorite movies? Not necessarily like your favorite movie just that makes you the happiest, but just your favorite science movies that you feel like did a great job representing the science, forwarding the science, publicizing the science.
And is this over the last? What's the time frame?
I guess I'd love to know one classic and one recent one. How about that?
Okay. Okay, so I think probably the most. I'm going to give you two classics. Is that all right?
Yeah, definitely.
So
we're making up the rules as we go here.
Yeah, there are no rules. I like it. So I think that when you go to like a JPL or a NASA or a SpaceX or
I got to ask, what's JPL? I don't even know. Is it one of the space companies?
Jet Propulsion Lab.
Gotcha.
It's NASA's. They do like the robotic missions. They built Curiosity and that kind of So their big project right now is Juno. So keep an eye out for what Juno's up to over at. But anyway, so
I'll have to Google that later. But how does this tie back to the movie?
So if you go into the offices where hundreds and thousands of engineers are toiling away to build the next probe that will land on Europa, if you look at the walls of their offices and their desks, you'll see Star Trek characters. I think above all else, maybe Battlestar Galactica, but so I think. When you look at a classic film, Star Trek, you have to tip your cap to what Star Trek has created and the number of people who have who went into STEM fields as a result of that show. I think more than any other, with I'd say a very honorable mention to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think those were the two classic sci-fi franchises that were grounded in something that really, I mean, you could look at Star Wars, but Star Wars is more like sci-fi fantasy, I would argue, and Star Trek and 2001 are really trying to base themselves in something that is plausible. So I'd say that those two are the classics. For my money, actually, the film that in the last couple of years came out. Actually, I'll do two for the present too.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I'd say that the most, and this is, by the way, I'm being a bit of a homer when I say this, but we did a consult on a film called Europa Report. That it was a smaller film that I think you can see it on Netflix now. It's a $3 million movie that basically was unbelievably just a very, very accurate portrayal of what the first manned mission to Europa might look like. And so that one, I think, was when you're looking at grounded movies, that was great. But I'd say that probably in terms of the big Hollywood movies, I'd really point to Gravity. That's the one for me that I think that 10 or 15 years from now, when you're getting that generation of astronauts who are colonizing Mars, they'll point to Gravity as a film that really got them excited about space travel when they were kids, I think.
Are there any movies that we haven't talked about yet that you guys worked on that we should definitely be hearing about before we go here?
Well, I mean, we have some funny things that we did, like this for Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Mm-hmm. The writer of that film, we got him into the Library of Congress to he actually got to go through with one of the curators there the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets on the night he was shot. Apparently, he had a Confederate $5 bill on him.
I saw that movie and they said, this feels accurate. This feels real to me. This feels like what would happen if Abraham Lincoln actually did fight vampires.
Well, it was cinema verite.
Right, exactly. What about the future? I mean, you guys still under 10 years old here, still kind of getting up and running. What do you think the future of the Science and Arts Exchange holds?
I think what I would love to do, I think we already do some work in trying to catalyze new content, as in, not developing intellectual property, but doing more to sort of help create new content in terms of like showing Hollywood what's cutting edge, sort of giving Hollywood a peek into the future, as it pertains to science, I think, and technology, I think, is sort of what we're more and more working towards. We've been doing annual retreats the last 3 years that bring 15 of the top writers in Hollywood and 15 of the best scientists in the country in a variety of fields to an undisclosed location to just sort of interact with each other and learn about science on the one hand if you're a filmmaker, and the filmmaking process if you're a scientist. And so for us, I think finding more ways to engage Hollywood in the things that we think are important and are going to have impact on the future is really front and center for us. I think we've already had impact also on characters, but to do more to show on screen that scientists come from a variety of backgrounds or a variety of ages.
Is that a call you get? Like, just how do scientists act? Not even about science itself, but about scientists.
We do sometimes get calls like that, and in that case, my answer is, well, hey, let's go. What are you doing later this week? Let's go out. Let's go out with some people who are in scientists, some people who are in science and different fields, and go and we'll get a lot of, what does a lab look like, and what is the culture in the lab, like that kind of stuff too, where it's like, and I think people are surprised. First of all, like, labs look, I don't mind this problem, but labs look much cooler on screen than they do in real life in terms of, lighting and stagecraft. You walk into a lab on a TV set and everything's bubbling and misting and all that, and you walk into a lab on a college campus and everything's duct taped and under fluorescent lights. So there's that, but I think that the scientists are much more dynamic generally than they are portrayed on screen, and I think that sort of image that people have of the sort of 60-year-old white male scientist is just so off the mark. So we do what we can to impact and change that stereotype as well.
What kind of impact do you guys think you have had on characters already?
I think that it's a really good question because it's very hard to measure. I think that we've clearly had impacts on characters, and we've gotten, in some ways, it's sort of a basic, for lack of a better word, well, duh kind of realization that scientists are people too. And yet somehow they are so, 80% of the American public says they've never met a scientist, and of the remaining 20% who say they have met a scientist, 80% of them are thinking of their doctor. So I think that anything that we can do on the screen to humanize scientists is important. And I know that we are having an impact on our audience. We have now about 3,000 to 4,000 entertainment professionals who we can reach and invite to our events and sort of the stuff we do around Hollywood. And I know that we're having an impact on those folks because, like, for example, I asked a writer who does big projects. I would call him out, but I don't know if he'd want me to.
Woody Allen.
Yeah. I asked him, when I introduce you to a scientist, and you're asking questions about genetics or whatever it is, and when you're working on that project and you're working on that character, do you just inherently have that person in your head when you're thinking about that scientist's mannerisms and who they are as a character? And his answer to me was, well, duh. So I do know that we're having impact, but I don't know that I could say, I can't give you a stat. Like, I can't be like, well, 49% of science characters have changed in X way. And I'm sure there are people who have who have some sense of how things are changing on screen, but I don't know that anybody is specifically writing their PhD right now to measure the change in how scientists are portrayed.
Well, I got to tell you, Rick, I love what you guys are doing there. You're making my movies better. You're getting science out there. It feels like a win-win. How can people find out more about the exchange?
Well, you can follow us on Twitter at SciEntX. You can check out our Facebook page, which is just the Science and Entertainment Exchange on Facebook. /Scient Exchange. And what's that?
Instagram.
Oh, we're on Instagram too. Are we at SciEntX?
Exchange.
At what is it?
Scient Exchange.
On Instagram, we're Science Exchange. Oh, sorry. On Instagram, we're Scient Exchange. And of course, our website. What's that? Oh, yeah. The other thing you can do on our website, which is the scienceandentertainmentexchange.com. What's .org? Sorry, I'm terrible with this stuff. All right, our website is the Science and Entertainment Exchange.org, and if you go to the Science and Entertainment Exchange.org, you can also sign up for our newsletter, The Collider. Which what the Collider basically is it's a few stories in science and a few events around the country that we think are cool and noteworthy, and you get it every Wednesday.
That sounds cool. I'm going to sign up for that. That's great. Well, Rick, thank you so much for stopping by, telling us all about it. Appreciate what you guys are doing out there.
Thanks a lot, man. It's a pleasure to be on the show, and I appreciate your making the call.
That was your Jeff Rubin Show for the week. Thank you so much for listening. But your job is not done yet. You got to follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Jeff Rubin Show. You got to follow me on Instagram, Facebook. You got to follow me in real life. You got to go to iTunes. You got to rate and subscribe. You got to rate and subscribe. You got to rate and subscribe, or at least that's what I'm to understand based on every other podcast I've ever heard. Thank you for listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks. I love you all. But for now, bye.
That was a HeadGum podcast.